So behind me is going to be a collection of photos that I've taken over the last couple of years. In UK, here, you'll see a couple photos from the bees that we have here on campus, as well as down in the majority, this one and a couple others down in Ecuador as well. So anyways, I'll get this going. Oh, my name's Sean Stoner. This is my Division 3. Majority of you in here know me. So I would like to start this off by giving a huge shout out to my family and girlfriend. I could have not done this without them. I felt nothing but love and support, and I am eternally thankful for their work and sacrifice that has allowed me to be here before you today. I would also like to say a big thank you to my Division 3 committee, Jennifer Hamilton, Jonathan Lash, and Kelly Bitoff, as well as to my informal committee, Bonnie Vachland and Ellen Bernstein. The tireless guidance through this process by these individuals has been invaluable, and through their help, I get to end up sounding a lot smarter than I am. So to the project. When anyone asks what I study, I generally say honeybees. I say this as if I mentioned that I studied the juridical history of U.S. environmental legislation as it pertains to the regulation of pesticides in the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. Most people seem to want to make an excuse to end the conversation quickly. Yet this subject has come to fascinate me, though the journey has been a wild ride. After my second year at Hampshire, I decided that I need to take a year away from college to gain some non-academic experiences that I believe could help inform me what I wanted to do for my Division 3, and thus how I'd be launched into the world beyond college. During that time, my mother gave me a magazine that had an article that discussed the current crisis of the honeybee and the impacts of pesticides. I realized that this was the issue I wanted to address. Apis mellifera, commonly referred to as the European honeybee, is a semi-domesticated social arthropod in a vast and colorful family of more than 20,000 bee species worldwide. The native range of Apis mellifera originally included Europe, Africa, and Central Asia. European colonists brought the bee to North America in the early 1600s. Previous to the human introduction of the European honeybee to North America, there already existed approximately 4,000 different species of other bees, including mason bees, leafcutter bees, sweet bees, bumblebees, and others. Throughout the history of beekeeping, there have been several accounts of massive drops in bee populations, from explainable events such as the use of bees in warfare during the period of the late Roman Empire to unexplainable epidemics such as what was the Isle of Wight experienced in the early 1900s, where 90% of the island's bees were lost. More recently, in the summer of 1994, French beekeepers noticed strange behaviors in their bees, such as not returning to their hives after leaving to forage, gathering in small groups, or confusedly hovering in front of their hives, resting for longer than normal while pollinating, and persistently cleaning and scratching themselves while they were on sunflowers whose seeds had been coated with the synthetic neonicotinoid pesticide imidacloprid. The following winter, these French beekeepers experienced an unprecedented 40% decline in managed honeybee colonies. In a report published by the European Environmental Agency, two researchers recount how evidence pointed towards the Bayer-made insecticide Gaucho, which contains the neonicotinoid imidacloprid. This was dubbed mad bee disease and caused a series of reactions in the European Union that led to the use of the precautionary principle of temporarily banning neonicotinoids while further evidence was gathered. Then again in November of 2006, David Hackenberg, a Florida-based commercial beekeeper, discovered that the bees of his 400 hives had disappeared. In February of the following year, Hackenberg and several of his peers whose bees had experienced the same fate brought this phenomenon to the public's attention. This resulted in a media storm and witch hunt for the cause of the disappearing bees, as more and more beekeepers came forward stating that their hives had collapsed with no bodies to be found. This event eventually was known as colony collapse disorder. Over the following years, enormous losses of managed honeybees were observed across many parts of the world. Theories abounded, from the interference of power lines and cell phone towers to the sublethal and lethal effects of the new pesticides, neonicotinoids. Because of the importance of insect pollination within modern agriculture and the recent crisis of mad bee disease and colony collapse disorder, the European honeybee is the most studied non-target invertebrate species. Not only is there a vested economic and cultural interest around the role of honeybees in the functioning of industrial agriculture, but they are also the most tractable pollinator species. Both beekeepers and scientists are able to move, study, rent, and sell honeybees with relative ease when compared to other invertebrates. This is due to the fact that honeybees live in vast colonies, as well as the long history of human to honeybee domestication. Though many sweetener alternatives have been developed, honey remains a significant international product. In 2007, global production of honey was estimated at 1.07 million metric tons for a value of $1.25 billion, which is a 58% increase in production from 1961. Though honey is the bee's best-known commodity, it is by far not the most important. In 2009, the value of insect pollination was estimated at being responsible for approximately 9.5% of total global agricultural production, or roughly $212 billion. In 2009, a report published in the Journal of Invertebrate Pathology states, quote, 52 of the 115 leading global food commodities depend on honeybee pollination. When considering the foods of the total human diet that are directly or indirectly reliant upon animal pollination, one can see that this is about 35%. But what is the most interesting fact is that this is not equal across the world, as direct insect pollination represents 22.6% of all agricultural production in the developed world and 14.7% of all agricultural production in the developing world. Within North America, excluding Mexico, direct insect pollination represents about $20.1 billion, and within the 25 nations of the European Union, it is approximately $19.8 billion. So what can we do about this? Almost 2 years ago, after reading the article my mother gave me on the current crisis of the honeybee and the impact of pesticides, I decided that for my Division 3, I wanted to sue agrochemical companies on the basis that they were committing crimes against humanity by endangering our global food security. I believed that the legal system would provide me with a tool to help protect one of the world's greatest agricultural workers, bees. I was wrong. I learned that through a tort case, I might have a chance to get money for beekeepers that had lost their livelihood due to colony collapse disorder. I also learned that all I could accomplish through the most powerful current legislation like the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, or Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act was to find some corporate procedural misstep. I could not find a force that could speak for the bees anywhere, nor could I find legislation that provided redress and sanctuary for the bees. After discussing this myriad of problems around finding legal pathways to help the bees, I was encouraged by my Div 3 committee to look into the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969, commonly referred to as NEPA, something that was widely hailed as the first piece of environmental legislation of the United States and came on the wings of Rachel Carson's seminal book, Silent Spring. In my research into this bill, I saw that its authors sought to create a nationwide dialogue around humanity's ecological connection to the rest of the natural world. They hoped that as a country, we could create policies that would ensure we understand the impacts of our technologies on the environment and ecosystems that we as a species depend upon. It was through this lens that I delved into the issues of pesticide regulation, the decisions made within federal courts that limited the importance of NEPA, and the potential horrible consequences of the use of cost-benefit analysis that is employed by the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. In completing the research for this project, an underlying narrative has emerged that consistently appears in discussions on the threats of technology and the relationship between humanity and the non-human world. This story or belief is that through our unique humanness, as exhibited by our superior intelligence and technological development, we as a species are separate and outside of the living systems that make up the Earth. This belief also holds that the history of our species is one in which the unnatural human world consistently impacts and degrades the rest of the natural world. The authors of NEPA clearly identified this story or belief, but the narrative has also often been repeated by many an environmentalist. Christopher Stone, in his book, Should Trees Have Standing, provides an excellent example of this narrative on his musings on some of the particular challenges that we as a species, and thus our legal systems, must face in the coming years. He writes, quote, "No human activity has had so far-reaching and pervasive an effect. Nothing has so transformed the landscape as agriculture," end quote. Stone explains that this transformation over the last 10,000 years or so has extended, quote, "well beyond the percentage of the Earth's surface that has been converted to feed humanity, as humans have reconfigured not only the landscape, but the forms of life," end quote. Stone argues that humans, through our intervention into natural patterns, have created, quote, "mutant plants and animals that would have stood no chance in a humanless nature," end quote. One can point to a number of examples in which Stone's statements hold true, such as the modern-day beef cow or domesticated turkey. But his idea falls short by not recognizing that the, quote, "history of life on Earth has been a history of interaction between living things and their surroundings, in which the physical forms and habits of the Earth's vegetation and its animal life has been molded by the environment." end quote. Rachel Carson's molded by the environment is best described by the word co-evolution. Thus, when Stone writes of the impacts that our species has had on the world, while failing to acknowledge the influence that these same creatures and ecosystems have had on the development of humans, he fails to recognize that there is no living species on Earth that is not engaged in a symbiotic relationship in which its own biotic structure and survival is not dependent on the health and well-being of another. Examples of this abound. Where would our species be without our relationship with carbon-cycling trees and phytoplankton? Where would our species be without our relationship with the plants that we have found we can eat? Where would our species be if it were not for our relationship with mycelium and other organisms that make up this planet's incredibly fecund soil? While it's impossible to say whether or not humans would exist today without the symbiotic relationship that science is now just beginning to uncover, it is undoubtedly true that human history and its numerous societal structures would be completely different. The authors of NEPA expressed something profound and true. They spoke of the interconnection and interdependency of all living things. They expressed what ecologists for years have known, that the health of one species depends upon the health of the living systems in which it exists and is a part of. These authors realized that the United States needed policies and laws that recognized this connection and demanded that humans should know the consequences before an action was taken. They realized that human technologies had reached a point where they could degrade and destroy the ecological balances that allows life to thrive on this planet. This fight is not over. I feel that the term existential threat has now become cliche in its overuse by environmentalists. But the American legal system must now cope with facing multiple existential threats. And I believe it is the honeybee that can show us the way through. In a conversation with Professor Gabriela Yunez, beekeeper and founder of an ecological preserve located on the side of a volcano in central Ecuador, I was told, quote, honeybees are the best thermometers, end quote. She told me that by listening and watching the bees, one can learn how to be in concord with the rest of the natural world. The legal code of the United States needs to embody this lesson. Congress, judges, and policy writers must see the existential necessity of listening to the bees and finding ways to speak to those who cannot hear the messages conveyed through their gentle buzzing. They must realize that the threat of their small stings is in no way comparable to the sting that comes with their destruction and systems collapse. It is time for the American legal system to assert the ecological and systems thinking principles of NEPA as a foundational pillar of current U.S. environmental policy. It is time for the American legal system to discard the use of cost-benefit analysis as a methodology for environmental impact assessment. It is time for the American legal system to be changed so that my children and my children's children can live in a bountiful and diverse world, safe from invisible toxins, safe from those whose ignorance or greed results in the horrors of unchecked technological impact. It is for our children that this must happen. Thank you very much.